Arrival with arrogance. The night sky shimmered with stars as a sleek, silver craft descended through the Earth's atmosphere. It moved soundlessly, almost invisible against the darkness. Inside the craft, Commander Valera stood tall, her violet-hued skin glowing under the dim blue lights of the control panel. Her sharp, golden eyes scanned the readings. "Primitive planet," she muttered. "Weak gravity. Weak species." Valera was one of the elite warriors of the Zaforian Empire, a race known for their strength, intelligence, and technological superiority. She had trained in the harshest conditions, fought in the deadliest battles, and conquered planets that were far more dangerous than this tiny blue world called Earth. She had been sent here to observe, but to her, it was nothing more than a joke. The Zaforians had long considered humans insignificant, tiny creatures struggling on a planet that could be crushed under their empire's might. Valera did not fear Earth. She pitied it. As her ship cloaked itself and landed atop a tall building in the middle of a massive human city, she stepped out with confidence. The city stretched endlessly below her, glowing with artificial lights and moving vehicles. The air smelled different, polluted, yet full of life. Weak creatures filled the streets, unaware of the warrior standing above them. Valera smirked. "These beings call themselves dominant," she whispered. "They do not know true power." The leap of arrogance. She walked to the edge of the skyscraper and looked down. The ground was far below, at least 100 stories down. The humans below looked like ants, moving without purpose. On her home planet, gravity was heavier, and warriors like her could leap across great distances with ease. This height was nothing. She spread her arms, feeling the wind rush around her. A leap from this building would be effortless. It would be proof of her superiority. "I will show these creatures what real strength is," she thought. With a final smirk, she jumped. For a moment, everything was perfect. The wind whistled past her, and the city lights blurred into streaks. She expected to land gracefully, with power and control, just as she had done 1,000 times on her own world. But something was wrong. The speed was too fast. The air pressed against her body with unexpected force. Her limbs felt heavy, her muscles strained against a pull far stronger than she had ever experienced. Panic flickered in her golden eyes. This was not like Zaforian gravity. Her calculations were wrong. Earth's gravity was stronger than she had anticipated. The crash. She crashed hard. The impact sent shockwaves through her body. The concrete beneath her shattered, cracks spreading out like spiderwebs. Pain exploded through her limbs, something she had not felt in years. Her armor's energy shield flickered and died. The impact had drained its power completely. Her body ached as if a mountain had collapsed on her. She could barely move. For the first time in her life, Commander Valera felt powerless. Lying in the rubble, she gasped for air, trying to push herself up. Her arms trembled. Her legs felt like they were pinned under a massive weight. She had underestimated Earth. A groan escaped her lips. How could this be? How could such a weak planet have such a crushing force? Footsteps approached. A group of humans had gathered, their faces filled with shock and concern. A young woman gasped. "Did you see that?" She fell from the building. A man in a uniform, probably some form of security officer, spoke into a small device. "We need an ambulance here. Someone just jumped, and I have no idea how she's still alive." Valera clenched her teeth. No, she could not allow these weak creatures to think she needed their help. She was Zaforian. She was a warrior. But when she tried to stand, her knees buckled. She collapsed again, breathing heavily. Her pride was in pieces, just like the concrete beneath her. The humans surrounded her now. Their voices were loud, filled with worry and confusion. "Miss, are you okay?" a man asked, kneeling beside her. Valera growled. The humiliation was unbearable. These humans, these weaklings, were pitying her. She tried to speak, to push them away, but her strength was failing her. Earth's gravity had humbled her in mere seconds. For the first time, she realized something terrifying. She was stranded on this planet, and she was no longer the strongest one here. The fall and the painful lesson. Valera lay in the debris, her vision blurry, her body aching in ways she had never experienced before. The sharp scent of dust and broken concrete filled the air. She tried to move, but her limbs felt as if they were encased in stone. Heavy, unresponsive, weak. That single thought burned in her mind like a flame refusing to die. She was a Zydphorian warrior, trained in combat on planets with gravity 3 times stronger than her own. She had battled in the vacuum of space, in storm-ridden worlds, and in frozen wastelands. And yet, here she was, defeated not by an enemy, but by the very air around her. This was not just pain. This was humiliation. She tried to push herself up again. Her muscles trembled under the unexpected force. The movement that should have been effortless felt like dragging an anchor through mud. How was this possible? The reality of Earth's gravity. Her mind raced to find an explanation. Zydphorian warriors were genetically superior, built for endurance, speed, and agility. Earth's gravity, according to their calculations, was lighter than Zydphorian gravity. So why? Why did she feel like she was being crushed beneath an invisible force? Then it hit her. She had underestimated something critical. Her home planet's gravity might have been stronger, but her body was conditioned to that specific environment. The subtle differences in atmospheric pressure, oxygen levels, and Earth's unique gravitational field, all of them combined to betray her expectations. Her body was not designed for this. She tried again to stand, her fingers digging into the shattered pavement. A warrior does not kneel. A warrior does not stay down. But as she lifted herself a few inches, her arms gave out, and she collapsed again. A deep growl of frustration rumbled in her throat. No, this cannot be. But it was. The humans gather. Around her, voices rose in concern. The humans, those insignificant creatures she had ignored moments ago, were now surrounding her. She could hear their hurried footsteps, their frantic whispers. Is she alive? How is she even conscious after that fall? Call an ambulance. She needs help. Their voices blurred together, but one thing was clear. They thought she was just another human. They did not recognize her as an outsider, as a superior being. They were treating her like a fragile creature in need of saving. Her pride burned hotter than the pain. She was Commander Valera of the Zydphorian elite, not some weakling who needed rescue. She forced herself to move, trying to roll onto her side. But even that was a struggle. A hand reached out to her, a human hand. "Miss, can you hear me?" a man asked. His voice was steady but concerned. Valera's golden eyes snapped to him. A tall male, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing with some kind of badge on his chest. A local enforcer, perhaps. A soldier. A protector of these people. She didn't care. She would not be touched by a lesser species. With what little strength she had left, she slapped his hand away. The humans gasped. Some stepped back. Others whispered, "She's conscious. She doesn't want help. She's probably in shock." Valera gritted her teeth. She refused to let them see her weakness. But her body had other plans. Her vision swam. The world tilted. The pressure in her chest tightened, and suddenly, the voices, the city, the lights, all of it faded into darkness. Unconscious, but not defeated. She did not know how long she was unconscious. Minutes, hours, the concept of time slipped from her grasp. When she finally stirred, she was no longer lying on shattered concrete. Something soft cushioned her back. The air smelled sterile, artificial, like a medical facility. A quiet beeping noise echoed in the background. She forced her heavy eyelids open. A white ceiling, bright lights, strange machines around her. She tried to sit up, but an intense pressure pinned her down. Not shackles, not restraints, her own weight. Her anger flared again. How could she, one of the most elite warriors of the Zyphorian Empire, be rendered so helpless by something as simple as gravity? Her eyes scanned the room. Humans were here. A few figures stood at a distance, talking in hushed voices. Some wore white coats, others had uniforms. The man from before, the one who had tried to help her, was there, arms crossed, watching her carefully. She clenched her fists. They think I am helpless. They think I am weak. But they did not know who she was. They did not know that the moment she regained her strength, she would rise again. She would conquer this gravity. She would conquer this planet. And she would make sure no one, not even Earth itself, would ever humble her again. Stranded and powerless, Valera stared at the ceiling, her golden eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. She despised their brightness. They made her feel exposed, like an animal under observation. The soft hum of machines surrounded her, their steady beeps and whirs filling the sterile room. Her body still felt heavy, too heavy. Every movement required effort, as if invisible chains held her down. She had woken up moments ago, but she had yet to move beyond slight twitches of her fingers. This is unacceptable. She willed herself to sit up. Her muscles screamed in protest, her arms shook violently, and a sharp ache ran down her spine. A Zyphorian warrior should not feel this way. She had endured battle wounds, survived explosions, fought against creatures 3 times her size. Yet Earth itself was winning this fight. Gravity. This cursed gravity. She clenched her teeth, refusing to groan. Footsteps approached. Her gaze snapped to the doorway. A human male entered. The same one from before. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform. He carried an air of authority, though Valera couldn't care less. To her, he was just another lesser being. A nuisance. He crossed his arms and studied her with careful curiosity. "You're awake." Valera didn't respond. He took a step closer. "Do you know where you are?" Again, silence. The man exhaled through his nose, unimpressed by her lack of cooperation. "You took quite a fall. Surprised you're even breathing, honestly. Most people wouldn't have survived that drop, let alone be awake just hours later. Most people." Valera's pride twitched, but she forced herself to remain still. She wouldn't give this human the satisfaction of seeing any reaction. He waited, then sighed. "All right. You don't want to talk. That's fine. But you need medical attention, and we need answers." Medical attention. The thought disgusted her. Zyphorians healed quickly. Their bodies were superior in every way. But she knew that if she refused too much human assistance, they would grow suspicious. And right now, she had no ship, no weapons, no communication with her empire. She was trapped on this planet, a stranded warrior in an enemy land. Fine. She would play along. For now. The first test of strength. The man studied her a moment longer before shifting his posture. "Can you move?" Valera wanted to sneer at the question. Of course she could move. She was. She tried. The moment she shifted, her body protested violently. Her arms trembled, her stomach muscles clenched in pain, and her legs felt like they were made of solid metal. She barely managed to lift her torso an inch before collapsing back onto the medical bed. A cold wave of realization washed over her. She could not even sit up. This planet had taken her strength from her. The man raised an eyebrow. "Guess that answers that." Valera's jaw tightened. She hated this. She hated that he saw her struggle. She forced herself to breathe evenly, disguising her frustration. She needed time to adjust. Her body was not weak. It was simply unprepared for Earth's gravity. That was all. The weight of humility. Another figure entered the room. A woman wearing a white coat and carrying some kind of digital tablet. A human scientist, most likely. Her eyes were kind, but analytical. She glanced between the man and Valera. "She's awake. That's good news. We need to run some basic tests." Tests. Valera's eyes narrowed. No human would test her. She was not some creature to be studied. The scientist must have noticed her expression. She smiled in what seemed to be an attempt at reassurance. You had a serious fall. We need to understand how you survived, and if there are any internal injuries. Valera stayed silent. The scientist hesitated, then turned to the man. Did she say anything yet? Nope, he answered. Not a word. The scientist frowned, glancing back at Valera. Do you remember your name? Valera refused to answer. The scientist tried again. Do you know where you are? Still, nothing. The man sighed. All right, let's keep this simple. Can you at least tell us how the hell you're still alive after a fall like that? Valera's lip curled slightly. Weak species. Limited minds. They could never comprehend her true nature. And yet, Earth had humbled her. The irony burned like acid. The scientist took a softer approach. We just want to help. Valera scoffed internally. Help. Help was for the weak. She did not need. A sudden dizziness hit her. The moment she attempted to move again, her vision blurred. The world tilted, her head pulsed, and an overwhelming exhaustion threatened to drag her under. Her body was betraying her. This wasn't just about strength anymore. If she didn't adapt, she would die here. The realization struck like a blade to the chest. She had to submit to their help. For now, admitting defeat, for now. Finally, she exhaled and shifted her gaze to the scientist. Where am I? The man raised an eyebrow. So, she does talk. The scientist gave a relieved smile. You're in a hospital. We found you after your fall. You survived, but your body has been through extreme trauma. You need time to recover. Time. Valera swallowed her pride. She hated this situation, but she had no choice. If she wanted to regain her strength, she had to understand this gravity, learn its effects, and conquer it. And that meant playing their game. For now, she relaxed her shoulders slightly, forcing herself to appear cooperative. Fine, she muttered. Do your tests. The scientist nodded. Good. We'll take care of you. Valera almost laughed at the absurdity. They thought they were helping her. They had no idea that once she was strong again, she would no longer be their patient. She would be their greatest threat. Help from an unexpected source. Valera had never known helplessness. For her entire life, she had been among the strongest of her kind, a Xiphorian warrior trained to endure any hardship, to break through every limit. She had conquered planets, crushed enemies, and stood unshaken in the face of danger. But now she could barely lift her own body. She lay in the human hospital bed, surrounded by strange machines that beeped and whirred at regular intervals. A tangle of wires connected her to monitors, tracking her vitals as if she were some fragile creature on the brink of collapse. It was humiliating. The weight of Earth's gravity had not lessened. Every attempt to move felt like pushing against an invisible force determined to keep her down. It wasn't just the physical strain. It was the realization that her entire body had been unprepared for this planet. Her homeworld had trained her for battle, but it had not trained her for this. She needed to adapt. She needed to understand this world's gravity, how it worked, how to fight against it. And for that, she would have to do something she had never done before. She would have to learn from a human. Enter Dr. Ethan Carter. The next time the door opened, a new figure entered. He wasn't in a uniform like the enforcer she had seen before, nor was he dressed in a white coat like the other human scientists. This one looked different. A man in his early 30s, with messy brown hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, walked in holding a clipboard. His gaze met hers with an expression that wasn't fear, nor awe, but curiosity. "You're awake," he said casually, as if they were old acquaintances. "Good. Was wondering when you'd stop pretending to be unconscious." Valera frowned. He smirked. "Yeah, I saw your reaction earlier. You were listening even when you weren't responding. Smart. You wanted to learn first before engaging. I respect that." This human was perceptive. more than the others. He pulled up a chair beside the bed and sat down, studying her carefully. "I'm Dr. Ethan Carter, specialist in biomechanics and physiology. They called me in because, well," he gestured toward her body, then at the data displayed on the monitors. "Your biology makes no sense." Valera remained silent. Ethan continued, tapping the screen beside her bed. "Your muscle density is off the charts. Your bones are reinforced in ways that shouldn't be possible for a human. And yet," he leaned forward, "you still broke." Her fingers twitched slightly. Ethan noticed. He smirked again. "You don't like that, do you?" Valera hated it. He leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but deliberate. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. Her golden eyes narrowed. "You're different," he continued. "Stronger, faster, at least you should be. But something about Earth's gravity is messing with you, isn't it?" He wasn't wrong. But Valera was not about to confirm anything. Silence stretched between them. Ethan didn't seem bothered by it. If anything, he seemed amused. "Well," he said, standing up, "whether or not you want to admit it, I'm here to help you get back on your feet." She almost laughed. A human. Helping her. Ridiculous. She finally spoke, her voice still slightly hoarse but full of defiance. "I don't need help from a human." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, because from where I'm sitting, you haven't even stood up yet." Valera glared at him. He crossed his arms. "You want to stay stuck in that bed forever? Be my guest. But if you actually want to move again, you'll need to start small." She scoffed. "I have fought in zero gravity. I have survived black holes. I do not start small." Ethan chuckled. "Great. Then prove it. The first step, understanding gravity." She expected him to bring out some strange human medical device or propose a ridiculous rehabilitation program. Instead, he grabbed an object from the table beside her bed. A small, simple rubber ball. Valera frowned. "What is this?" Ethan tossed the ball into the air and caught it effortlessly. "A test." She stared at him. "You expect me to play with a child's toy?" "Not exactly." He tossed it again, this time letting it bounce on the floor before catching it. "Right now, your biggest enemy isn't your injuries. It's Earth itself. Your muscles are fighting against a force they don't understand. So, before you can walk, you need to feel what Earth's gravity actually does." She hated how logical that sounded. Ethan smirked, as if sensing her reluctance. "Go on. Try throwing it." Valera scowled. This was beneath her, but she needed to move. She lifted her hand, or tried to. Even the simple motion felt like lifting a boulder. The weight of her own arm was more than she had expected. She growled under her breath, forcing herself to push through it. She grabbed the ball. Her fingers trembled slightly from the effort. Ethan watched. "Good. Now throw it." She clenched her jaw. She had once shattered steel with her bare hands. Now she was struggling to lift a ball. Fury burned through her veins. She tightened her grip and hurled the ball forward. But instead of flying in a perfect arc, it fell short, bouncing weakly onto the floor. Valera froze. Ethan nodded as if he had expected this. "Yeah, that's what I thought." She stared at the ball in disbelief. She had miscalculated. On her homeworld, her muscles were built for higher gravity. Her movements were instinctively calibrated for sci-fi in physics. But here, she was a novice. Ethan crouched, picked up the ball, and handed it back to her. "Try again. This time, focus, adjust. Feel the weight before you throw it." Valera hesitated. She despised taking orders from a human, but she hated losing more. This time she focused. She felt the weight in her hand, the subtle pull of Earth's gravity. She adjusted her angle, her force, and then she threw the ball. It landed farther. Not perfect, but better. Ethan grinned. "See, you're learning." Valera gritted her teeth but said nothing. She still despised him. But for the first time since she had arrived on this planet, she had something she could control. And she would master it. No matter what it took. Training under Earth's gravity. Valera had never struggled before. Every challenge she had faced, every battle she had fought, she had overcome with ease. Her body had been an instrument of war, her mind an unbreakable force of strategy and precision. But now, she could not even throw a ball properly. Earth had stolen her strength, or rather, it had forced her to relearn everything. Dr. Ethan Carter leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her carefully. He hadn't mocked her, nor had he shown pity. Instead, he had treated this as a simple fact. "You're fighting it," he had told her. "You're treating gravity like an enemy, something to resist. But that's not how humans survive. We don't fight gravity. We work with it." His words haunted her. She had always fought against obstacles. She had never learned to work with them. And so, for the first time in her life, Valera trained like a beginner. The first challenge. Standing. She had expected Ethan to provide her with a grand strategy, some advanced human technique that would accelerate her recovery. Instead, his first lesson was humiliatingly simple. "Stand up." Valera gritted her teeth. "You mock me." Ethan smirked. "Nope. I just know you haven't actually done it yet." Her golden eyes flashed with anger. She hated that he was right. For 3 days, she had been lying on this bed, trapped under the crushing weight of this world. Even now, lifting her arms felt like moving through thick mud, and attempting to sit up made her dizzy. But she was Zephyrian. She refused to be weak. With a deep breath, she forced her body upward. Her arms shook. Her legs trembled. But she refused to fall. Her vision blurred as blood rushed to her head, her body struggling to adjust. But then, for the first time since her fall, she was upright, even if she felt like she might collapse at any second. Ethan didn't clap. He didn't praise her. He simply nodded. "Good. Now walk." The agony of movement. Walking was supposed to be easy. But the moment she took a step, her legs buckled. She fell forward, but Ethan caught her. She hissed in frustration, pushing him away. She would not be supported. She would stand on her own. "Relax," Ethan said, stepping back. "You're trying to move like you did on your home planet. But that's the problem. You have to let your body adjust. Don't force it. Work with it." Valera took a slow breath. Adjust. She shifted her balance, feeling the pull of gravity. Instead of trying to resist it, she let her muscles move with it. She took another step, then another. Still slow, still weak, but improving. She could see Ethan smirk from the corner of her eye. "Told you." Valera scoffed. "One step does not make me victorious." "True, but you're no longer stuck in bed, are you?" She hated his logic, and she hated that he was helping her. Training. Strength versus adaptability. Over the next few days, Valera pushed herself harder than she ever had before. Her muscles screamed, her body ached, and she fell more times than she could count. But she learned. She stopped trying to fight Earth's gravity. Instead of pushing against it, she used it. Instead of trying to lift heavy objects as she would on her home planet, she adjusted her grip, her stance, her force. Ethan introduced her to human training techniques, balance exercises, endurance drills, controlled movements. Things she had never needed before, but now were essential for her survival. She started small, throwing the ball again. This time, her aim was better. Then came push-ups. At first, her arms could barely hold her up, but by the third day, she was moving faster. Then came sprints. The first time she ran, she stumbled. Her legs felt like lead, her reflexes off. But by the end of the week, she was moving faster than any human in the building. Ethan watched her progress with an unreadable expression. "You're improving fast," he admitted. "Most people take months to recover from an injury like that." Valera smirked. "I am not most people." Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I figured. breaking her own limits. One night, after the facility had gone quiet, Valera stood in the empty training room. The monitors were still tracking her vitals, but she had been given some freedom now. She stood before a weight machine, something Ethan had told her not to use yet. "You're not ready for that," he had said. He was wrong. Valera placed her hands on the grips, feeling the cold steel beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath, and she pulled. The weights barely moved. She clenched her teeth, muscles straining. She was strong. She was powerful. She had to prove it. With one final push, she let out a low growl of effort, and the weight lifted. Not by much, but enough. She exhaled slowly, a small smirk forming. She was getting stronger. And soon, Earth's gravity would no longer be an obstacle. Ethan's concern. The next day, Ethan found her training harder than ever. She was moving faster, pushing her limits. And it concerned him. "You're rushing this," he told her. "You should be pacing yourself." Valera smirked. "That is how humans train. I am not human." Ethan frowned. "No, but you still have a body. And if you push too hard, you could break yourself again." Valera laughed. "I have broken 1,000 times. And I have risen every time." Ethan watched her carefully. Then, after a moment, he sighed. "Fine. Do what you want. Just don't blame me when you collapse again." Valera simply smiled. She wouldn't collapse. She was almost back to full strength. And soon, she wouldn't need a human's help anymore. A newfound respect. Valera stood in the training room, her breath steady, her muscles burning from the relentless drills she had forced herself through. The once unbearable weight of Earth's gravity was no longer crushing her. It was now something she could predict, manipulate, and even use to her advantage. She had adapted. At first, she had fought against this planet, treating it like an enemy to conquer. But now, she had learned the truth. Strength alone was not enough. Power without control was meaningless. She thought of her homeworld, the Zaphorian war academies where she had been taught that brute force and superior might always lead to victory. But Earth had taught her something different. Humans had no natural strength, no biological superiority, no advanced technology like her people, and yet they survived. They endured. She had spent weeks in this strange place, surrounded by creatures she once thought insignificant. But every day, she saw something unexpected in them. Persistence, adaptability, a refusal to break. It was something she had never respected before. But now, she could not ignore it. The final test. "All right, warrior," Ethan said, leaning against the wall with his usual smirk. "Since you're oh so confident that you're back in top shape, let's see what you've got." Valera arched an eyebrow. "You challenge me." Ethan grinned. "Not exactly. More like an experiment. I want to see if you've actually learned how to move in Earth's gravity or if you're just muscling through it." She crossed her arms. "I have mastered your world's gravity." Ethan tossed a small metal coin onto the floor. It clinked as it landed. "Then prove it." "Pick that up." Valera frowned. "That is ridiculous." "Is it?" Ethan challenged. "You can lift hundreds of pounds now, but can you control small movements? Can you adjust to Earth's physics in every aspect, not just brute strength?" She scoffed. This was a waste of time. She stepped forward and reached down to grab the coin. But the moment her fingers moved, she misjudged the distance. The force of her reach was too fast, too strong. The coin slipped between her fingers, flipping onto the floor again. She narrowed her eyes. She hadn't expected that. Ethan folded his arms, watching her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Valera gritted her teeth and tried again, this time slower, adjusting to the finer details of movement. She pinched the coin between her fingers and lifted it successfully. Ethan nodded approvingly. "There it is. See, strength is great, but control is better." She exhaled. It was frustrating, but she understood. Sephorians were strong, but humans were precise. They didn't just overpower obstacles, they adapted to them. It was a lesson she never thought she would have to learn. But now she realized. If she had fought a human warrior before coming to Earth, she would have expected them to break under her strength. But now, she saw the flaw in that thinking. They would have found a way around her. She was starting to understand why humans had survived for so long. A warrior's respect. That night, Valera sat in the quiet training facility alone. The artificial lights buzzed faintly, casting a dim glow over the empty room. For the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about dominance or superiority. She was thinking about growth. She had assumed that humans were weak, but weakness did not mean failure. Weakness was simply an obstacle, one that humans had learned to overcome in ways she had never considered. She remembered the scientists who studied despite their lack of physical strength. She remembered the engineers who built great machines to conquer their environment. She remembered the ordinary people who, despite their fragile bodies, refused to surrender to the forces of nature. And she thought of Ethan, who never once feared her, even when he should have. That was strength, too. She had spent her whole life believing that warriors were the greatest force in the universe, but now she was starting to realize, perhaps warriors weren't the only ones worth respecting. Ethan's perspective. Ethan leaned against the observation window, watching Valera in silence. She was different now. The arrogant, untouchable warrior who had first arrived on Earth had been replaced by someone more controlled, more precise. He had seen her stumble, fall, and get frustrated. He had seen her push herself beyond what he thought was possible. But more importantly, he had seen her change. And that was the real test, wasn't it? Strength alone didn't define a warrior. The ability to evolve did. She had learned something that most people, even humans, struggled with. True strength wasn't just about power. It was about understanding the fight before you entered it. Ethan smiled slightly. Maybe you're not so bad after all, alien. A new mission. Valera closed her eyes for a long moment, her mind racing with new thoughts. For the first time in her life, she questioned her training. Her people believed in conquering, in proving themselves superior. But what if that was not the only way to grow stronger? She had come to Earth believing she was untouchable, that her species had already achieved the peak of evolution. But now she saw the truth. Even she had more to learn. She clenched her fists, determination settling deep inside her. She had conquered planets before, but this was different. This time, she would return home with knowledge instead of dominance. Because if the Xiphorian Empire underestimated humans, they would fall just as she had. Redemption and departure. The night sky stretched infinitely above the city, vast and indifferent. From the rooftop of the medical facility, Valera stood tall once more. She had conquered Earth's gravity. She had mastered its weight, its force, its subtle tricks. But she had also gained something far more valuable. She had gained understanding. The journey had been brutal. Every step, every fall, every frustrating moment when her own body betrayed her. But it had also been enlightening. Strength alone was not enough. Power meant nothing without control. And true warriors knew when to learn. She clenched her fists as the cold wind rushed past her. She had changed, but now came the true test. What would she do with this knowledge? Behind her, a familiar voice spoke. "You're really leaving, huh?" Valera turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, that same unreadable expression on his face. She nodded. "My ship is waiting." Ethan exhaled, walking up to stand beside her. He glanced at the sky, then back at her. "So, what now? Gonna go home and tell your people that humans aren't as weak as you thought?" Valera smirked slightly. "I doubt they will believe me." Ethan laughed. "Yeah, I figured." For a moment, there was silence between them. Not the awkward kind, but the kind filled with unspoken thoughts. Valera spoke first. "I was wrong about this planet. About your people." Ethan tilted his head. "Yeah." She exhaled. Humans do not win wars with brute force. You do not dominate with strength. And yet, you endure, you adapt. That is a kind of power my people have never understood. Ethan shrugged. We don't really have a choice. We're not the strongest, so we make up for it in other ways. Valera nodded slowly. Yes, and that is why you have survived. Another pause. Then Ethan smirked. So, does this mean you actually respect us now? Valera gave him a sideways glance. Do not push your luck, human. He chuckled. Too late. The decision. She had everything she needed. Her strength was back. Her body had fully adjusted. Her ship's cloaking system was still active, waiting for her in the outskirts of the city. There was nothing stopping her from leaving. And yet, something held her in place. For the first time in her life, Valera was unsure. She had always known her path. Every mission, every battle, every purpose had been clear, defined, absolute. But now, things weren't so simple. She had seen the strength of humanity, not in war, but in survival. In their ability to endure, to adapt, to push forward even when the universe tried to break them. And she had begun to wonder, if Zyphorians did not learn this lesson, what would happen to them? She had barely survived her own arrogance. What would happen when her empire finally turned its attention to Earth? Would they underestimate humanity, just as she had? Would they suffer the same humiliating defeat she had? The thought made her uneasy. The Zyphorian Empire was vast, powerful, and had conquered countless worlds. But they had never faced a species like this, a species that refused to fall. The warning. Valera turned to Ethan. Your people will face my kind one day. Ethan's smirk faded. Is that a threat? She shook her head. No, it is a warning. Ethan's expression hardened. Should I be worried? Valera exhaled. Perhaps. But I will do what I can. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then, he gave a half smile. So, you're saying you'll vouch for us? She crossed her arms. I will make them listen. They must understand the mistake I made before they repeat it. Ethan nodded. Good. I'd rather not have to deal with an alien invasion. She smirked. If they do come, I suggest you do what you always do. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's that? Her golden eyes gleamed. Adapt. Departure. Her ship was exactly where she had left it, hidden in the shadows beyond the city. She stepped into the cockpit, feeling the hum of its familiar power as it recognized her presence. The controls felt lighter than before, not because they had changed, but because she had. She took one last glance at Earth through the viewing screen. The planet looked small from here, fragile even. But she knew better now. It was not fragile. It was not weak. It was resilient. And that resilience had changed her. As she activated the ship's engines, a thought crossed her mind. Perhaps true strength was not about how much power one held, but about knowing when to learn from those who had none. Her ship vanished into the stars, leaving Earth behind. But she would not forget. And neither would her people. Because if the Zyphorian Empire ever underestimated humans, they would fall just like she had. And they would never get back up.